So we'll start with a moment of silence, James.
Yes, we will. Yes, sir. Some silence.
So very warm welcome to everyone and good evening to everyone. So we'll start with the workshop today, which is exploring the spiritual ranges of mind. And whenever we think of mind, it's something which we have. We think that we have mind and we can use it, but most often than not, we get used up by the mind, abused by the mind. So I think it's really worth to really know what is possible for our mind. And the facilitator for the workshop is Dr. Soumitra Basu. I think most of us are aware of him, but I'll just share a few lines of introduction. So Dr. Basu is a consultant psychiatrist based in Kolkata and Pondicherry, and he works with the consciousness paradigm of health and psychology. He's deeply interested in Aurobindonian metaphysics and mental health. He's also authored a book recently, which is in press, with Dr. Michael Miovic of USA, which explores consciousness-based psychology. And the first time I heard Dr. Basu, but just like to share this anecdote and then we'll give it over to you. I think it was at Sakar, Pondicherry. We were attending a workshop and Dr. Anand Reddy introduced Dr. Basu as Duronto Express. So I still remember that. And it's amazing the flow with which Dr. Basu speaks and the grace that flows out of his mouth. So over to you, Dr. Basu, and look forward to the workshop. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Monica and James. So this is okay? This is audible? I am audible?
Yes, you're audible. Yeah.
And, so it is I will be touching a topic which is very important, interesting topic. And it exposes one of the most original contributions of Sri Aurobindo to the world of thought. And that is his unraveling of what I would call supracognitive planes of consciousness. Means we have our cognitive plane, our mind, which we know that it is the cognitive field, our present mind, which is the field of cognition. But then Sri Aurobindo talks about supracognitive planes of consciousness, and this is something which is unique. It is one of his greatest unique contributions to the world of thought. Remember that for the last 2000 years or more, the world was more or less thinking along a certain paradigm, and which was very floated in a very important way by Buddha, Confucius, and Plato. So that type of thinking that was going on for 2000 years, that cycle is now coming to an end, and a new type of thinking, a new type of non-linear thinking is going now to occur. Actually has started occurring, and it is a wave that is coming from Sri Aurobindo's vision, and absolutely new paradigm of thinking, and this is now again going to rule the earth, our consciousness, for many years. So one paradigm of thinking is coming to an end, another paradigm is coming to a beginning, and then it is very important, also very interesting, that it has taken 100 years for Sri Aurobindo's ideas to be consolidated in the consciousness of the earth, because he wrote all his major things 100 years back, and after 100 years only, the world has got ready to shift from a linear to a global thinking, and that is now that is now it is possible to understand Sri Aurobindo. Otherwise, it would have been difficult. You see that previously exceptional minds could understand what Sri Aurobindo was saying. Of course, people all over the world were understanding, but they were exceptional minds, but not the general mass mind. The general mass mind, it is only in recent times that there has been a change in the general mass mind, the general thinking, where the mind has become more receptive, and the mind is now wanting to shift from linear to global thinking. As Mother said, very beautiful words, that truth is not successive but simultaneous, not linear but global, circular, and hence it cannot be expressed in words, it has to be lived. And taking that cue, I would also point out that why Sri Aurobindo's thinking was very difficult, or is still very difficult, but still we try to understand, we try to approach him with all devotion and all the grace of the Mother, because Sri Aurobindo has himself said that what I tried to bring, what we tried to bring, means he and the Mother, was presented or worked upon simultaneously along different lines of consciousness, simultaneous thinking along different lines of consciousness. And that was a strain. And he said, I am obliged to put that strain on my readers. I am obliged to put that strain on my readers. So keeping that in mind, we invoke Sri Aurobindo's grace and we invoke the Mother's light, that we might understand a bit of what Sri Aurobindo is wanting to say. Now, before I start the deliberation, the main deliberation, I will come to this point that why of all Sri Aurobindo had to start with something like this, supracognitive planes, because we all have our mind, and we know that the mind is exceptional. Our human mind has acquired exceptional qualities. We can do so many things. We can go to the moon. We can conquer the sky. We can conquer everything. Science has got us so many things. And on the spiritual side, we are at great heights. So I don't know that how that image will come. But can you hear the voice? You can hear the voice. Okay.
Yes, we can. No problem.
So why on earth that he has to venture on such a thing, that to discover different spiritual mind ranges, when we already have on one hand the mind which has been developed by science, and on the other hand we have great spiritual seekers in all over the world, and especially in India, who had uncovered the truths that were hidden in the Vedas and the Upanishads. Then why on earth he has to do something new? And then that will start with a Chaldean legend. It's a legend. It's a legend. Don't take it in a very strict scientific term. But Mother liked it very much, because though it is a legend and it is older than the Egyptian tradition, it contains some seed ideas which are very beautiful. And the legend was this, that when creation had to be done, the Supreme released a number of things, and they were told, develop yourselves. The Supreme released a number of things. So love was released, life was released, knowledge was released, joy was released, all these things were released, and they were given a chance to develop. And not only to develop in any way, but develop infinitely. So you can develop in infinite type of variations. So life can develop in infinite ways, joy can develop in infinite ways, knowledge can develop in infinite ways, and happiness can develop in infinite ways. And life can go on expressing in multiple varieties, in multiple variations. What a joy, so much, so much variety. But then what happened was, when you develop in an infinite way, at a certain point of time, you also have the freedom to develop your opposite. You also have the freedom to develop your opposite. No? Like, as I'm a psychiatrist, I can also be a bad psychiatrist. I can be I can also, while developing, I can be someone who actually exploits one's clients. So it's like that. everything was given a possibility to develop, and everything was also given the choice of developing the opposites. And that's why at a certain point of time, all the opposite things began to develop. So life began death, life became death, knowledge became ignorance, light became darkness, joy became sorrow, the happy, also what you call the pleasure that was being obstructed by, or that was being represented now by the opposite of pleasure, hatred and whatnot. So every opposite of what was there, opposite of all things, they developed, and then the creation became a chaos. The creation became a chaos. So to correct that chaos, a second group of forces were sent. They go and correct them. And this second group of forces, the corrective forces, they were what we call the gods or the angels or the fairies, so many terms, the divine beings in different cultures, in different countries, in different religions. We have different names for these forces. So they were secondary. They came here after the first lot landed into chaos, and which means that the negative aspects of the truth, which are represented by the devil, the Satan, the Mephistopheles, Lucifer, they came after, they came actually before. They came actually before the gods manifested. So it was that when the creation came, it was the first the devil, which is incarnations, no, which was there, and then the gods had to come to correct it. Now, mind you, this is a tradition. This is just a childish legend. It is a legend, but the legend has some truth in it. The legend has some truth in it, and we see the effect of that legend, of that truth, is that throughout history we have been living together with all the falsehoods, all the ignorance, all the opposites of the truth, and also our strivings for the truth. See, both are there. So we strive for absolute truth, absolute knowledge, absolute joy, absolute life, immortality, but at the same time we have to succumb to all the opposite things, as if the Satan or the devil is equally powerful as the divine being. So as if they are equally powerful. And of course, in many traditions, in many religious traditions, they have been given an equal importance. Only in our Indian tradition, they have also been given great importance. Only they are classified in a different way. What you call the devil or the Satan or the Mephistopheles or the Lucifer, there in the Western world and in the Semitic world, we classify them in a different way according to the consciousness, as Asuras, as Rakshasas, as Pishachas, and there are different things. We'll come to it afterwards, because it is also interesting how the different divisions they work. And at the same time, they are working, the gods also are wanting to help us. But what happens is that the quarrel never ends. But in your Indian tradition, we still have given a higher ranking to the gods, because for us, we believe, which Sri Aurobindo says, that all these negative things, the Asuras, the devils, they have emanated from the divine, and they will actually dissolve in the divine. It's not that they are going to be permanent. They have evolved from the divine, but they are going to dissolve into the divine. That's why at one point he has said in Savitri that they were so happy, they were crying in joy, the Asuras, when they knew that the time is coming to an end. And because the time has to come to an end, which is Sri Aurobindo's sadhana, which is Sri Aurobindo's spiritual pursuit, that the time for the Asuras, for the negative forces, has to come to an end. That time has come to an end. So when we talk of apocalypse, it's not that the creation is going to dissolve. In our terms, in Sri Aurobindo's terms, in the supramental vision, the apocalypse is not that the world will collapse or the creation will collapse. It's that the negative forces which were there from the beginning, they will collapse. They will go away. So that's a big jump. That's a big thing. And then why Sri Aurobindo is being interested in the main thing, that why Sri Aurobindo comes into this picture. You see, because the negative forces have been so powerful in the world, then it has been very difficult to establish or to bring over the kingdom of truth in the world. You see, the world is a mixture of truth and falsehood. To have a kingdom of pure truth without any admixture of falsehood is very difficult, because of the presence of the devil and his emanations. And it is very difficult, and many religions they have been unable to solve the problem of making the earth perfect. So they had to say that the heaven is not here, heaven is not in the earth, heaven is somewhere else, in some other level of consciousness. Heaven is some in other level of consciousness. You have to leave the earth and go there. Only you have to be in the world in a nice way. You have to follow certain rules. Religions have laid down moral rules, might be other rules also, might be spiritual rules also. But all these rules, if you follow, then you will get a passport where to go to heaven, which is somewhere else. So this was a big consideration in many important religions which are there in the world today, outside India. And what happened in India? In India also, we are not far removed from it. You see, we are not far removed from it, because though we believe that the negative forces have emanated from the divine, but still how to tackle the negative forces in the world, that was not known. That was never known in the Indian tradition. So that's why Shankaracharya had said, Jagat Mithya Brahma Satya. The world is an illusion. The Brahman is the only truth. The world is an illusion. The world means the world of human transactions, the world of our transactions, the world of our values, the world of our all psychological conflicts. All this is an illusion. And then the only truth is Brahman. And afterwards, the post-Buddha Buddhists, they were also very intelligent. They said, oh, yes, yes, we agree that the world is false. But Brahman is true. Actually, nothing is true. Then what is true? True, that is nothing, that is zero. Zero is the only truth. You see? So they went one step further. Not only that is, world is an illusion, your conception that the Brahman is true, that is also an illusion. So everything is zero. Now, then what was the what was the end result of both Shankaracharya and the Buddhists? Same end result. They all said, the final view was that it is better not to be born again. It is better not to be born again. And that is why the concept of liberation that became so important in the Indian psyche, that you have to be liberated from the earth, liberated from human transactions, liberated from all your psychological conflicts, liberated from this earthly life, liberated where? Into the splendor of the divine. And the divine, you might say in a positive way, you can say there is a Brahman, which is a positive way of expressing the divine. And you can say that it is a great void, zero, negative, which is another way of expressing the same thing. Sri Aurobindo said that void actually means that you cannot describe it in cognitive terms. Zero doesn't mean that it is actually a zero. Zero means because it is beyond your cognitive grasp. You are telling that it is zero, not because it is a real zero, but because it is beyond the grasp of your cognition. So that's why it is a zero. So then all the solution all over the world for so many years up to the time Sri Aurobindo came on earth, the solution was only one, that either you go to heaven or you don't be born again. Either you go to heaven and be immortal there, or you be born or don't be born again. So now Sri Aurobindo had to bring in something else. He had to build a world of truth and harmony in this matrix where falsehood is winning, where ignorance is winning. And for that, he had to introduce new elements in thinking, new elements in metaphysics. And not only he has to introduce, he had to work upon it, he had to live it, he had to grow into it, and he had to make it available for us. That was also his grace, that not only he achieved that possibility that something could be done, but he has also made the possibility that something can be done for the art, for us as a whole, not only for himself. And that is how he stumbled upon this whole truth, that to make this world a true living place of harmony and truth, then we have to bring down the highest creative consciousness. That also was not known in the Indian tradition. Like that, what is said. You see, what is creative consciousness means? That will come on the last day. Just I will tell one line, then you will remember. Then the last day will come to it, which is extremely interesting. And one of the greatest contributions of might be, I think that it is one of the greatest contributions of the human mind ever for the last thousands of years. And where is the creative consciousness? That in India it was said that one became the many. One became the many. But how did one become the many? How? What magic? One, it was one. Brahman was one consciousness. And from one, many appeared. How from one many appeared? How can many can appear from one? Now, Swami Vivekananda also has said, if you read his collected works, he has said that it is a, nobody has uh, answered this question. He has said that. Swami Vivekananda is saying nobody has answered this question. They have used the term Maya, by Maya. Maya means outwardly an illusion. But he said that that is a descriptive term. It is not an explanatory term. Maya is a term of description, but it is not a term of explanation. Now, Sri Aurobindo, the first time he described how one became the many, because below the supreme reality, he described a plane of consciousness where a sort of software programming is done. A software programming is done where the greatest values of the supreme reality, which is known as Satchidananda, Satchit Ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Sri Aurobindo, of course, modified it. Satchit Shakti Ananda, existence, consciousness, force, and bliss. These supreme terms, they undergo a sort of computer programming, in computer terms, and where that they could be manifested into multiple real ideas that can be turned into reality. So that is done at a very special plane of consciousness, which he described as the supermind. And between the supermind, you see, this is a very unique concept we'll talk about in the last day. I told you that Sri Aurobindo, what he has presented, and my friend Michael always says that Sri Aurobindo is a combination of Buddha, Shakespeare, and Einstein. He's a combination of Buddha, Shakespeare, and Einstein, and then exceeding them all. So these three great minds, you bring in different facets of the truth, and then he's exceeding them all. And it is one of the greatest geniuses that Sri Aurobindo has been given, has come to the earth, and he has given this very great secret of how the consciousness, how the creation has come. And to understand that it is not easy. And our aim is to have that supermind, when that reign of the supermind, or what he calls the supramental consciousness, that has to come down, and it has to manifest on the earth. Only then the earth will become a place of harmony and truth. So Sri Aurobindo is not contradicting the idea of liberation. He's not contradicting Shankaracharya. He's not contradicting Buddha. He's not contradicting the Semitic religions. He is saying that there is another way possible to develop, that instead of what is present, from the mind you can jump to the Brahman. You can jump, like that. There is a galloping train which doesn't stand in many stations but stands in the final station. So like that, you can jump from the mind, the present cognitive mind, to the great void or to the great Brahman, anywhere, whatever you want. But that is another option available, another way available, where the mind can actually climb to the supermind. Mind can actually climb to the supermind. There is another way that has not been unraveled. Little bit intimations had come about that thing to our consciousness always. Intimations of that great pathway have come to us, but we didn't, that secret was not revealed, that it could be developed, and it can be developed as a series of ranges, and that's what we call the spiritual mind ranges, with which we started this talk, that we will be discussing about the spiritual mind ranges. So the spiritual mind ranges is actually describing that pathway which is what you call exceeding our cognitive status and going to the supermind, and in the process it is building up different planes of consciousness, different ranges of consciousness, different ranges of the mind, spiritual mind range. And these are all, I would say that each range, each plane is a supracognitive plane. It's not our usual cognitive plane. It's a supracognitive plane. So something is being built which is going far, 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 far beyond. Something which is entirely new. It has never been unplumbed in this world. That Sri Aurobindo is doing it. He is going to enter that territory, and he has to unravel that. And you see, it is a two-way action. That one, you open up and you go there to the supermind, and the supermind comes down. And why it is necessary for us to know? I will tell why it is necessary for us. Because when the supramental creation comes down on the earth, then the earth will be transformed. The earth will be transformed. So the word liberation, the password of Indian spirituality, Sri Aurobindo replaces it by a new password, which is transformation. When the supermind comes down, then the whole creation is going to be transformed. But immediately it is not going to happen. It is going to happen in stages. It is going to happen in stages. And human beings will also evolve into something greater than what they are now. So that is the most important thing. The human beings are going to transform themselves and evolve into higher forms. They are going to evolve into higher forms, and until the supramental being comes into the picture. So the supramental being is the highest being. That is far away. That is far away. When someday that achievement will be there, the supramental being will replace the human being totally. The supramental being, the being of total knowledge, the being of integral knowledge, the being of integral force, the being of perfect perfection, the being of perfect perfection. But before that comes, Mother has said the number of intermediary beings will come between us and the highest. Intermediary beings will come, and these intermediary beings are now in the process of being made, and so that we grow into these intermediary beings, not in this life, but actually, but within. You see, we try, then in our consciousness, then this movement will follow, and within some years, might be 100 years, or I would say it might be earlier, the intermediate beings will start making their presence felt in, of course, not in a full-fledged way, but also as in a partly it will come. Actually, the stage is now ready. If you see, if you go to these spiritual wide ranges and we try to develop them, and we see that we are now developing, we are trying to work on this to develop into intermediate beings sometime in future, and that would be the greatest offering of our mind or of our consciousness to Sri Aurobindo, that we are real followers of him, not only just trumpeting his name, and but actually following it, and following it in the steps that he has laid down, which is very interesting stage. So with this beginning, which is a bit complex, but I think that you would follow it. I've tried to present it in a simple way. Now, with this in background, we will try to understand the supracognitive planes are the different ways of thinking. We'll start actually tomorrow with the main thing, where we'll start with the very ordinary thing. We'll start tomorrow with our with the way how the mind works, and then you can understand, you go to how the mind can work also in extra ways. But before that, today we have to understand a little bit of consciousness. We have to understand, otherwise we'll not be able to follow the whole thing. To follow the whole thing, we have to have an idea of what is consciousness, and understanding the human being in a consciousness perspective. Again, I am using the word human being. Though I am a psychologist, I am not using the word human personality. Why? Because in spiritual terms, a human being has a dimension of personality. It has equally a dimension of impersonality. If personality is there, the being also can have impersonality. Another very, very interesting thing. We can also develop our impersonal perspective. It's not only that we develop our personality. No? We have all personality development programs everywhere in the world, but we can also have a development program that actually targets our impersonal perspective also together with our personality. So that's why it is necessary to understand Sri Aurobindo's perspective in terms of a being, in being, B-I-N-G, being. Now, I will try to show you a presentation of Sri Aurobindo's structure of the being, and it might be a little bit complicated, but you just bear with it. If it is not that complicated, it appears complicated. So we'll come to that. What Shilpa has said, the question will come to that, and we'll first come to the Sri Aurobindo's the structure of the personality. Will come to it. And, you can see it, no? You can see the screen. Am I all right? Am I being able to reach you with this screen?
Yes, we can see.
Yes. So you
Thank
see
you.
this, trying to understand the structure of the being. You see that we have an outer being, we have an inner being, and we have an inmost being. So psychology is only concerned, modern academic psychology is only concerned with the outer being. And the outer being is what we actually study as personality. When we in psychology, when we study as personality, we are studying the outer being. And in the outer being, we have the different planes. So you see that there are two perspectives. Why this is a bit complex? This figure is a bit complex because the human being is simultaneously being seen in two perspectives. There is a vertical perspective. There's a physical, vital, mental. From below up, it is going. From the unconscious, it is going to the superconscious. From the unconscious, it is going to the superconscious. So that's a vertical plane from below to above. And that is a horizontal plane that is going from outwards to inwards. That's going from the outer being to the inmost being, the outer being to the inmost being. So that is a horizontal dimension. Now the two dimensions together being placed here, it looks a bit complicated. But if you see the outer being is that what we know, we have our physical, our outer personality, our surface personality has three main planes of consciousness. We have the physical plane, we have the vital plane, and we have the mental plane. So there's the physical, vital, and the mental. And what is important is that for understanding, I've shown it as different planes, but actually the outer being, they are not different. They are all mixed together. They are all mixed together. And why they are mixed together? Why they are mixed together? Why they are not different? Because they have evolved from the inconscious. Evolution starts from the inconscious. In the inconscious, what has happened? The superconscious has come down and become the opposite. The superconscious has come down and become the opposite. As I told you, that love became hatred, knowledge became ignorance, light became darkness, life became death. So from that matrix where everything has turned topsy-turvy, from that matrix where everything is confused, and evolution is starting. And the first formation that is coming up has a mixture of all things because everything is mixed in the inconscious. And while they're coming up, they needed a scaffolding to come up. While they were coming up, they needed a scaffolding to come up. No? When something amorphous comes from a matrix which is again very, very amorphous, and from there something is being created and something is coming up like a lump of clay, something is coming up, then then there has to be a scaffolding to hold it, and that scaffolding becomes the ego. So in life, that scaffolding becomes the ego when it is expressed in life in terms of in which we know as human beings that the surface personality has this mind, vital, and physical all mixed together, and they are somehow they are held together by someone, the ego, who has not dropped from the sky. You see, the ego has not dropped from the sky like a meteorite. It has come down, it has also evolved from below, like the scaffold, as the scaffolding which held the mind, vital, physical elements together. And that's why the ego is contributed from all the three. Ego is contributed by the mind, something of the vital goes to contribute to the ego, something of the physical goes to contribute to the ego. Everything contributes to the ego. Everything contributes to make the ego. So the ego is not something separate from all these things. Ego is something which has been constructed from these elements only. Now, what is the purpose of the ego? What it is doing? Now, as I said, because the mind, vital and physical, are mixed in the surface, we do not have a harmony in our surface personality. So today, your mind might want that I will study Savitri in a very serious way, but your physical, your body might come with a headache, or your vital, your emotions might be, you might be very emotional to do something, but your mind will have reservations and will not let you enjoy that day. So all the time we have a conflict between the mind, vital, and the physical, because their boundaries are blurred here in the surface personality. They are all mixed together, and that's why all it is very conflicting. It is a very disharmonious situation. Now, how then we are running the show? Still we are running. Still we are running. We are living in the world. We are doing something. We are being born. We are being educated. We grew up. Then we married. We work, and then we, at a certain time, our time ends, our span ends. But how then this whole period somehow we are going on doing the work and act in a play, which Shakespeare said. No? Life is like acting out different roles in a theater. How we are doing it? Because we are doing that because the ego is somehow trying to maintain a balance. Ego is somehow trying to maintain a balance between the mind, vital, and the physical. And but the problem with the ego is, in Sri Aurobindo's version, you see, ego, the problem of the ego is psychological, not moral. You see, we sometimes hear, get out of your ego, don't be so egoistic, don't show your ego. Very common things we hear in all over the world. These things are said. Now, egoism and ego are different things. Egoism means an attitude that what I think is the important thing, but ego is an entity. And as an entity, it is trying to balance the mind, vital, and the physical. But because it is made up of these three elements, and because in some people the mind element is stronger, in some people the vital element is stronger, in some people the physical element is stronger, so the ego is also biased. Right? It cannot be neutral. It cannot work harmoniously. It is biased. In terms of statistics, I would say that the ego is skewed. Ego is skewed in its functioning. Ego is somewhat skewed in its functioning. So this ego cannot justifiably do the work of trying to harmonize the mind, vital, and the physical. So what was the solution? The solution in India, when the password was liberation, you see, when Shankaracharya said Jagat Mitha, Jagat also means the surface personality. Jagat or nature doesn't only mean trees and mountains and rivers. Nature also means human transactions, and nature also means our outer personality or surface personality. So when Shankaracharya says that Jagat Mitha, so he is saying that the outer being is, one can't do anything with the outer being. You have to be liberated from the outer being. So you get liberated from the ego. And then from the you can go to Brahman, you can go to the Nirvana, you can go to the void. Anyway, you go anywhere, but you leave this world. But somehow we have to, you see, then this whole thing, this liberation, this concept of liberation, this transcending the ego and getting liberated from the surface personality is good for spirituality, but it doesn't hold good for psychology. In psychology, we have to survive. In the world, we have to survive. We have to live in this world. So it does a service to spirituality. It doesn't do a service to psychology. When I first started my work in integral psychology, Sri Aurobindo psychology, a very famous professor of philosophy, one who had succeeded Radhakrishnan in the chair where Radhakrishnan had held, he had told me that look, psychology is not for spirituality. Or you are wasting your time working with psychology and spirituality. Then I got a very rude shock. Then Chota Narayanji was here, the ashram, with a big sense of humor. He told me that go and tell that professor that you are not working on psychology, you are working on integral psychology. So it's like that. And then I will see the ego is very difficult. It is biased in the functioning. You cannot get rid of the ego like that. To get rid of the ego, then you have to dissolve the surface personality. If you get rid of the ego, then you dissolve the surface personality. And that also is very difficult. Do you think that everybody can dissolve the surface personality? Very difficult. I will tell you a very interesting thing. You see, the ego has different aspects. There's a mental aspect of the ego, the mind ego, no? Especially which you can understand in people who are very great intellectuals, theorists. No? They think that my theory is the right one, my idea is the correct one. So they are full of intellectual mental ego. So still you can work on it and you can get rid of it. Then there's a vital ego, no? The ego full of desires, the ego full of all your hedonistic pursuits, all your ambitions, all your high urges that you have to create something, you have to do something for the world. Life is useless unless you are extremely active. For that, of course, people have worked. The great Buddha, he has given us directions how to get over desire. When you get over desire, then you can get over the vital ego. But physical ego, you see, the mental ego, it is controlling our intellectuality. The vital ego is controlling our dynamisms and our desires and all our lofty urges. But physical ego, that is holding our physical consciousness together. That is a different ball game together. If you get rid of the physical ego, you imagine what can happen. If you get rid of the mental ego, you can be free from intellectual biases. If you are free from vital ego, you can be free from desire, desireless action. Follower of Buddha, follower of the Gita. But get rid of the physical ego. Mother tried it and found it so difficult. Mother found it very difficult and said when she wanted to get rid of the physical ego, that was the point, because the physical ego is holding the physical substance together. Though it is all topsy-turvy, though the physical substance has got so much what you call imperfection, still it is holding it together. And when mother wanted to try to get rid of the physical ego, she said a point came when anything could have happened, meaning that even death could have happened. And then she said that I couldn't do it myself. I had to invoke the destructive power of Shiva. I had to invoke the destructive power of Shiva to break the physical ego. You see, imagine, it is so difficult. And then mother said another thing. Even if the ego has been dissolved, mental, mind, vital, physical, you have conquered the ego. Mother said, still you have not done the full thing. Why? She says that some residue remains. Some residue remains. And that residue is called, in Aurobindonian terms, the substratum ego. Substratum ego. A residue of the, and it is a floating impression. A floating impression of the ego remains. And mother said very poignantly that many people who do sadhana actually come after dissolving the ego, they come to that residual ego and they think that they have reached the absolute, the perfect, the self, the Atma. So whenever somebody says that one has reached the Atma, be very careful. One has actually might have been reached some residual ego that has been left. Anyway, now the ego, working on the ego is so difficult that it will take many, many lifetimes to get over the ego. And we want to perfect ourselves in the world without abandoning our surface personality. Without abandoning our surface personality, as in the liberation yogas, without doing that, we want to be in the world and we want to be perfect. Then what do we do? And here Sri Aurobindo comes in with an entirely new description that behind the outer being, that is an inner personality, there is an inner being. He also calls it subliminal being. Inner being or subliminal being. Of course, it was known in a different way throughout tradition. It was known in glimpses, in fragments, in parts, but not Sri Aurobindo developed it into a whole inner being. He said that all that we know in fragments and what you call in very small amounts that we know the truth, they can all be organized into a very viable inner being which is standing behind the outer being. And Sri Aurobindo's psychology actually starts from the inner being. Whole of Sri Aurobindo's psychology starts from the inner being, and this inner being is behind the outer being. It has an inner mind, it has an inner vital, it has an inner physical. And this inner mind, inner vital and inner physical is a word which doesn't sound nice in English. So he substituted the word subtle physical. And this inner being is in communication with the cosmic consciousness. You see, that is the cosmic consciousness. So this inner being is in communication with the cosmic consciousness which is all around. And in the same time, the inner being is connected with the outer being. You see that in each box between the inner being and outer being, there are so small spots. So there are small pathways between the inner being and the outer being. So in the cosmic consciousness, there are great creative things which come to our inner being. And from the inner being, they can percolate into the outer being, drop by drop, little by little, through perforations between the inner mind, inner being and the outer being. So there are perforations at the level of the inner mind, perforations at the level of the inner vital, between the outer being and the inner being. So there are these perforations or pathways are there, from where, from the cosmic consciousness, great things can come into the inner being and they can just enter the surface personality. And this inner mind has a greater range of cognitive activities than is possible in the outer mind. The outer mind is limited in its scope. The outer mind is limited in its scope of functioning. It cannot think beyond the limit, but the inner mind can go on thinking beyond our usual limits. So it is capable of many things. It is capable actually of developing and going to the superconscious. The inner being goes to the superconscious, and below it sinks down to the inconscious. The inconscious is not the Freudian unconscious. The Freudian unconscious is before the inconscious. So actually that I have not shown. Actually it sinks to the subconscious, which is the Freudian unconscious, and from the subconscious sinks to the inconscious, which is a total denial of consciousness. The inconscious is a total denial of everything. Now, from this inconscious to the superconscious, that is this vertical dimension, and between it is the inner being, which is behind the outer being, which can expand to the superconscious, which can sink into the inconscious, and all around it can grow into the cosmic consciousness. And this inner being is not supported by the ego. Inner being is not supported by the ego. It has to be supported by the soul, which will come, the inmost being. The inmost being is the soul principle in action. So the inner being is something which is supporting the which is being supported by the soul principle, will come to the soul principle. Now they have to develop this inner being. Otherwise, you see that one always in India we had this option that let the soul come and rule. The soul, the Atma can come and rule. Why care about the ego? Go to the Atma. Let the Atma rule. Let the Atma rule your personality. Let the Atma rule your being. This solution was, or this idea was there, but this idea was never effective in practical terms. This idea was there that be a God realized person, be a person gathered around the Atma. Don't have to care about the ego. But then this didn't work. Didn't work. Why? Because Atma cannot come directly and work in that matrix of where the surface personality works, which is the matrix of the lower nature. The lower nature. There are two types of Prakriti in India. There's a lower Prakriti and the higher Prakriti. The lower nature and the higher nature. So there's a mixture of falsehood, in a mixture of all sorts of negative things. The Atma cannot come and work. It cannot find a place. You cannot just bring there and start working. You cannot do that. Between the Atma and the outer being ruled by the ego, you have to develop the inner being. And once you develop the inner being, you are making a possibility that something which is still below the inner being, the Atma, can come and the ego is no longer necessary. The ego is no longer necessary. So we have to develop the inner being. So this is a very interesting thing. That unless the inner being is developed, because this requires a different type of orientation, different thinking. We have done programs before on this. We can do always endless programs we go on doing in this. We actually, this program, this week's workshop, we'll be working more on the inner mind. And there will be, of course, there will be future workshops where we'll be working more on the inner vital. There will be workshops where we'll be working more on the inner physical. So we have to actually work on all planes together in the integral worldview. But this workshop, this week, we are going to work on the inner mind and how we can develop it further beyond the constraints of the ordinary outer mind and go step by step towards the superconscious, towards the supermind. That is something we will be pursuing. So remember, this week we are actually pursuing the inner mind portion of the inner being. Now, so as we have an inner mind, which are faculties that transcend the mind's cognitive capacities, we have an inner vital. This inner vital has got so much energy. That energy is in connection with the cosmic energy. And that energy is not constrained by the mind and the physical. You see, we have energy out in the outer personality of energy. I have a lot of energy to do a lot of work, but the mind comes and enforces sanctions. The body comes and puts so many difficulties. My energy gets clamped in the outer being. In the inner being, your energy is free. It can roam. It is not constrained by your outer mind and your outer physical. It is not constrained by other things. So the inner vital is full of energy, and it is connected with the cosmic energy. And with that energy, you can increase your vitality. And with that energy, it has healing powers. You see great healers who are not doctors. There are many people in the world who are healers. How do they heal people? Because they activate that inner energy which is there in the inner vital. And if you can activate your inner energy, you don't have to heal others. You can heal yourself also. So it is something which is a self-healing capacity it has got. And it has got an energy which can be connected with the universal energy. So it's a great thing. This inner vital, if you work on it. And then we have the subtle physical. It's a very difficult concept. The subtle physical, which contains our subtle cells, the what you call the we have to work on the body consciousness. Then again, it is a totally different field game. Understanding the body consciousness will itself require a workshop for a week to understand what is the body consciousness, what is the subtle physical, and what contribution the subtle physical will have in the new supramental creation, and what we have to start working on from now onwards. So that is also some what you call a very great discipline that has to be followed, and a very must discipline, because it is the basic thing. When the new being will be made, we are not only composed of the inner mind, we will have an inner vital and we will have a subtle physical. And if these things are not developed, we will not be able to grow into full intermediate beings. So mind you, today's workshop will be, this week's workshop will confine only to one portion of that inner being. But there are other portions also that will need other developments also. And between the inner being and the outer being, there are these channels of communication. These channels are what? What are these channels of communication? Shivaji said that mostly they are closed. They open, very rarely they open, and they open partially. And even that partial opening that happens, the great things that are there in the cosmic consciousness, they enter the inner being, and from the inner being, they enter the outer being through these points. So these, what you call these gateways. And Shivaji actually says that these gateways are the ones which are known as the chakras in the Indian tradition. So the chakras in the Indian tradition are nothing in the Aurobindonian terms. They are the passages between the inner being and the outer being. There are passages at every level of consciousness, from the below, from the base of the spine to above. You have all the chakras. All the chakras actually are passages. And then you see, but in Shivaji's perspective, the chakras have to be worked in a very different way. Actually, from below upwards, the chakras have been opened in Indian tradition, but Shivaji doesn't prefer that, because what happened in the Indian tradition, the lower chakras were being opened, a lot of physical and sexual energy was released, and then afterwards there were no good guides to take you along the way. So then Tantra degenerated, got stuck up at some plane. You see, Tantra advocated opening the chakras from below upwards, and Shivaji advocates opening it from upwards below. The force upwards, there's the Mahakundalini above, is the superconscious that comes down, that will open the chakras. But again, it's a different thing. Again, it will take another week to understand the functioning of the chakras. You see, it's such a complicated picture. It will take another full week to understand the workings of the chakras in the Aurobindonian tradition, which is totally different from the other paths in spirituality in India, where they work on chakras. Shivaji system is totally different and very flexible. And the beauty is that even if you are not aware of the chakras, if you are open to the mother's grace, the grace will act on the chakras and will open the chakras that are necessary for you in your personal growth. Even you don't have to know the grammar of everything. Even if you don't know, mother's grace will act and work on them. Anyway, our time is short because I have to give you time for questioning. So we'll come to this next third one, where there is the inmost being. The inmost being, as you see that as the ego, the inmost being actually is the soul principle. But again, this is also Sri Aurobindo's unique way of presenting. You see, there's a central being above. There's a central being above, on your left above. There's the central being. The central being is the Jivatma. That is the one thing that was always known in the Indian tradition. The Jivatma, the soul of the Atma. When we talk about the Atma, there's a central being which is not inside the manifestation. It is outside the manifestation. It is just holding our being. Jivatma is not inside us. Jivatma is not inside the manifestation. It is outside. It is outside. It is just holding our structure. And this is what everybody has always. acknowledged in the Indian tradition. That's the Jivatma. And you get identified with the, when you are identified with the Jivatma, then you are identified with the impersonality, the phenomenon of impersonality. Because the Jivatma is it, what is it? It is not in the manifestation, it is not inside your being, but it is supporting your being. It is simultaneously singular and plural. The central being is simultaneously singular and plural. Very interesting. It is both singular and both plural. You know, it is like the folds of a curtain. That is a big curtain and there are many folds. So it is the same curtain, but again each fold is different. Each fold is unique. So like that, each Jivatma is unique. But then again, each Jivatma is one fold of an universal consciousness, of the universal being. So that's how when we say that the Atma is the same in all, Atma is the same in all, then we get surprised that how everybody is so different. If the Atma is the same in all, why everybody is so different? One is a saint and one is a sinner. How it is like that? It's not like that in that way, that everybody is equal. You have to understand the terms of equality. The terms of equality is that the central being which is supporting our manifestation is both singular and plural, and that it is like the folds of a curtain. Each fold is unique, but each fold is in continuity with the other folds, because each fold is one fold of a big curtain. It's like that. Now, this was always known. Now, since Sri Aurobindo gives another way of understanding it, he explains that the central being throws a projection into the manifestation. It sends a projection into the manifestation, and that projection he calls it as a Chaitya Purush, or the psychic being. Like the ego you have on one side, you have the psychic being on the other, and the psychic being is represented again in different places in different ways. It is the same thing. It is represented at the level of the mind as the Monomaya Purusha, which is the true monumental being. These terms were known ever previously, but Sri Aurobindo actually accords them the correct place in the scheme of whole things. When you understand the true significance of Monomaya Purusha, when only you understand when Sri Aurobindo puts it into the whole picture. So that's the Monomaya Purusha, the mental being. The true vital being is the Pranamaya Purusha. The true physical being is the Annamaya Purusha. And the three can be equally represented by the psychic being or the Chaitya Purusha, which are the same thing. It is in the central poise. The psychic being is the central poise of the inner being, inmost being. And this psychic being, you see, why I say that the world can be made a beautiful place only if this psychic being can come forward. If the psychic being can come forward, what happens? At a certain time, the inner being and the outer being fuse with each other, and the psychic being can replace the ego, take its place. So the soul principle can only come to the front where if you do a progression, if you work on it and bring what is deeply behind, that you can bring it in front. And while you are bringing it in front, the inner being and the outer being, they fuse. But while they are being fusing, the other things are also happening. Your inner mind is also developing into spiritual mind ranges. Then only you will be effective, no? Because all things have to go together. You see, the inner mind has to develop, your inner physical has to develop, inner vital has to develop. Only when they are fully developed, then only the outer being and the inner being can be fused. Like that, they will not fuse with each other. Only we have worked with the inner being, then only the inner being and the outer being will fuse with each other. And while they're fusing with each other, the psychic being will come forward. And if the psychic being comes forward, it replaces the ego. And then you have a personality which is individualized around the psychic being. And in the inner being, what is the beauty in the inner being, another which I missed out, as in I said that the outer being, the mind, vital, and the physical are mixed with each other. You can't separate them. But in the inner being, they can be separated. They can be segregated. You can understand the uniqueness of the mind, minus the vital and physical. You can understand the uniqueness of the vital, minus the mind and the physical, which you will never know in the outer being. You can understand the uniqueness of the body consciousness. The body also has a consciousness of its own and uniqueness of its own. We don't know. We know our unique mind. I'm very good in mathematics. We know our inner vital. I'm of an angry temperament, but we don't know the uniqueness of my body. I don't know until the point when we become chronically ill, then we know, oh, this part of our body had suffered. We had never given attention to that part of the body, and now that is suffering. Only then we can understand that, oh, the body has something unique. So that's our main thing as this personality, this program, the psychic being has to come forward and he has to replace the ego. But in his coming forward, the inner being has to develop and the inner being has to fuse with the outer being. And in that development, the inner mind, the inner vital, and the subtle physical have to be developed. And this is what we will be doing this week. We will be trying to understand inner mind and trying to develop our inner mind, so that we play a little bit of part into this whole game. We start playing a little bit of part. Of course, we are mental beings, so it is easier for us to start with the mind. It will be easier, and then you can go to the vital, then we can go. Of course, the subtle physical is the most difficult. Body consciousness is the most difficult of all the three things. So this is how, in a nutshell, I have tried to bring together a very complicated system. And if you have any questions, you can write in the chat box. You can ask. If you have any questions, you can ask now. So if you want a little break for 5 minutes for taking water and all, if James, is that allowed?
Yeah, sure, sure.
If
Actually, your screen sharing is
people
still
might
on.
want a break for 5 minutes, you can allow that.
Yeah.
You have to
Your
ask the
screen.
house. You have to ask Monica. Sorry, you have to ask Monica. She has to decide, na? She's the
Sure.
Speaker of the Parliament.
Your screen sharing is still on, Dr. Basu.
We will continue, or we'll have a 5 minutes break.
Yeah, sure.
So I will start with these two questions that have been given, and I invite you that so I will start with these questions. So this one question was that the ego is actually, in Aurobindon's terms, an entity that is temporary. As Monica has gave as Manan has given, this ego was the helper. Ego is the bar. Ego was the helper because without the scaffolding, I told you, ego was the scaffolding around which the the being was evolving. So something that is evolving from the mud, from the earth, from the mud, that clay needed a scaffolding. So that's why initially it was needed. But when this work has been done, it has to be disbanded. So that's why the question of transformation of ego are it doesn't we don't talk about it. We talk about it in Aurobindonian terms. We talk about repressing the ego. At one point of time, the ego, after it has done its work, it has to be repressed by a beyond ego principle. That is, mind you, again, we are not considering the ego in moralistic terms. Its term has ended. It is limited. Its functioning is limited. We want to replace it by a beyond ego principle. So we want to replace it. That's the main thing that we have to do. Now, how to replace it? In that, you see, in that process, we have to bring the psychic being in front. Now we can destroy the ego is a very difficult thing. As I told you about mother destroying the physical ego, mental ego, and the physical ego, she needed the force of the Shiva to destroy the physical ego. So it's such a big thing. We will take thousands of births to do that. For us, it is much easier. Much easier. Why? Because the mother has made it easier for us. It's not because things are easy. Because she has made the psychic being, her grace is acting now on the psychic being. When mother's grace acts on the psychic being, so that the psychic being or the antaratta that can come forward, and it can replace the ego. Because the mother has given us this grace today, that is possible. And remember, because the mother's force directly acts on the psychic being that can replace the ego, because the mother's force directly works on that, in our Aurobindonian system, we don't have initiation, we don't need initiation or diksha. Na? As in all other religious institutions in India, you have diksha ceremony. You have to be initiated, you have to be given a mantra. But here, all these things are not needed because the mother's force directly works on the psychic being. That's the grace. That's the grace that we have been given. So that is one thing, that ego, instead of instead of destroying it, not think of it, but concentrate on the psychic being. Let us make that it come in front so that it sends the ego to its, automatically it will send the ego to the place where it has to be delegated, in a secondary place. Now, about the difference of these Atma, Paramatma, and all these terms which appear to be confusing because we often use the same word for different things. You see, we have to differentiate here in a very strategic way that there are the uh, Jivatma is the one which is also known as Mahatma in the Indian tradition. What is known as the Atma in the Indian tradition is also very specifically known as the Jivatma, which is outside the manifestation. It is just holding us, but it is not. It sends a projection into the manifestation. You have no confusion with the part of the soul. It is sending a projection. It projects itself into the manifestation, and that projection comes at first. It is just a small projection which grows gradually through life, and life it also through evolution it is also growing. See, it has been projected into as a simple projection, and then it grows into a personality, and that personality is called the psychic being, and the psychic being is also known as the Antaratma. It is also known as the Chaitya Purush. It is also known as the Antaratma. So that you should not be confused with this. Now this Jivatma is the individual self. Behind the Jivatma, but the same thing, there's a cosmic self. And behind the cosmic self is the transcendental self. Sri Aurobindo describes that the self is there in three equal poises. Three equal poises. The same thing in three poises. There's a transcendental poise, which is the Paramatma. But you say the Paramatma, there's a transcendental poise. There's the universal poise, which is the Vishwa-Atma, the Atma of the world, of the cosmos. And that is the individual Atma. That's the Jivatma. So the three things, it is the same thing in three different poises. Same thing in three different poises. So one is the transcendental, which is the Paramatma. One is the universal poise, the universal Atma, the Vishwa Atma, the cosmic Atma. And then there is the individual Atma, which is the Jivatma. And this Jivatma again sends the projection. Again, this Jivatma, though it is individual, I told you it is singular and plural at the same time, because it is supporting the manifestation in a way where everything is not cut off from everything. Everything is actually in communion with everything. And that level of communion is actually at the level of the Jivatma. So that is why I told you that you have to consider it like the folds of a curtain, where each fold is unique, but each fold is actually in continuity with the other fold. So in that way, all Atmas are the same, all are united. And again, because each fold is different, so each one of us has a uniquely different personality. So that way you have to consider. Of course, this behavior, that's a big thing. That's a big thing of research, that what you said, that Pratik Anand, which he has said, that you can explain the associated forces behavior which emerges from the plane of consciousnesses. Of course, this is a very big thing. This is actually a subject of our psychology, consciousness-based psychology. That book that we are is in press and will be coming out, will be actually dealing with this thing. The associated forces, how they are associated forces, and the associated behavioral, and and at every level the modalities of bringing back the harmony. So all these things are there. Also how the forces act, and how the forces causes disharmony, and how you can bring back the harmony. So all these things are there. So you have to wait for that, because it is a very big thing. That's the whole work of consciousness-based psychology. It's very good that you have asked this question, which sees that you are interested in the whole thing. But you have to understand it in a very detailed way. We, of course, all these programs that we do now and then, we touch one or other aspect of this thing. Well, I think that we could start, when we ask this question, once we will start with the vital, we will be able to understand a bit of this thing. But on the last day, about consciousness and force, I'll be stating something about consciousness and force, how they are different things and how they are also the same thing.
Sir,
Inner mind, we'll work on it, no? Then we'll identify.
sir, may I ask related that also, sir? In that book, have you deal with the color also, range of the color of the each plane of the consciousness, like Mother has explained about certain forces at from where it's descending, so how it, what are the colors?
We have explained that. It is fully based on the Mother and Sri Aurobindo's teachings. There's nothing outside it. It's just fully, purely based on Mother Sri Aurobindo's whole, what do you call, the gamut of consciousness that they have presented.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Is that inner mind, Mr. Nair has said that you can, of course, we'll do that work. From tomorrow, we'll start doing that work to develop our inner mind, and or the inner being. The inner being also, you still start with the inner mind. We'll start with the inner mind, then you will understand a little bit about the inner being. We'll start doing that tomorrow. We'll have experiential exercises from the third day onwards and a little bit tomorrow. So then you can understand a little bit about inner mind. Yes, this life divine Shilpa said, we know the reality of the universe. We do not yet know the process by which the reality has turned itself into this phenomenon. That is, he is introducing it because he is going to present in the life divine the concept of the supermind, where he will be dealing with the process by which the reality has turned. But in this week, we'll have only one. We have one session on the supermind, so we'll touch the main aspects, just the main themes. But once I think that we have to have a full like this a week's exposition on the supermind, because it's a very difficult concept, then you can understand things little by little. So anything else? Anybody can add also. Anybody can add also to what we have presented. It's not that we have to question, and it's not that everything can be answered straight away. But
Dada, can I ask my questions now?
yes, yes. Then somehow the Chaitya Purush and Jivatma, how are they related? I just answered this. This Chaitya Purush and Jivatma, how they are related. The Jivatma sends a projection into our being, which is the Chaitya Purush. So the Chaitya Purush is inside the manifestation and is taking part in evolution. But the Jivatma is beyond the manifestation. It is not taking part in that evolution directly. What can we do better today to have the ego balance within us? Of course, no. You see, the main thing is to understand the different physical, vital, and the mental planes of consciousness. That is the first thing. Then you will be able to keep the ego at its proper place. First, we have to develop and understand the different planes of your being. So all the different planes, all they are mixed together. Then understanding is difficult, because then I have to understand what's the vital physical, what's the physical vital, what's the physical mind. All these are subdivisions of the surface personality. So all this we can do, because this is an endless material is there. We will do this. What you say that this is a good question, which Milu has said, which is a good question. But for that we have to have a full session on understanding how they are mixed together and how we can make them separate. Then only we can help the ego balance within us, even in the outer world. Yes, Manan.
Great. So thank you for the lovely introduction, Dada. I have two questions. You were talking about the transformation, and you said that there are inner physical, inner vital, inner mental, that when they are fully developed, we have a state of true individualization, and then the psychic being comes to the front. So I was wondering if that is the state in which the whole journey over many lifetimes of the psychic being also consciously starts facilitating our journey from that point onwards. Does it happen like that?
Yes, the psychic being waits for a time when you waits for that opportune time, so that it can come forward, and what the rich experiences it has got through many lives, that can come, so that can be utilized. It is waiting for that time. So of course you can say in that way, but also then also you have to remember that you see, we have the heart chakra, and behind heart chakra is the psychic being.
Yeah.
When we have the heart chakra, why did Shiva have to bring the psychic being? We already have a heart chakra. So why did he have to bring the psychic being? But if you see the structure, the heart chakra, all chakras are between the inner being and the outer being. So the heart chakra, what it is doing? It is consolidating universal love by delinking the ego, for delinking the being from the ego and from the mental, vital, physical attachments. The heart chakra is delinking from everything. The ego, it is delinking that love from ego and from the physical, vital, mental attachments, and it is connecting that love, individual love, with the universal love. So that everyone has done that, from Jesus to Buddha. Everybody, knowingly or unknowingly, without mentioning the chakras or not mentioning the chakras. That is the process by which everything works. Now the psychic being, what you said, is very special because it has come directly from the Supreme. It has not evolved from the inconscious. Because it has not evolved from the inconscious, it doesn't contain the stains of the inconscious. And it doesn't need to be detached from anything because it is intrinsically pure. It has waited for so long because so long it couldn't work. It is intrinsically pure, but how can it work? Because the field is being held by someone else. So once you can bring it forward, it can do its work. And it is so important, I will tell you, as a extension of your statement that you made, as an extension of your statement, that towards the end, when the mother, we see that our evolution starts from the inconscious. And the inconscious has all the falsehood, ignorance, and suffering, and all that. So all these things enter into our being, automatically they enter into our being. Now, mother was wanting to make a new creation which will not have these stains of the inconscious, which will not have anything of the falsehood, suffering, and all. How to do that? She was thinking for years and years. It was only in the last few years of life that it suddenly came to her that the template will be the psychic being. The psychic being will be the template of the new creation. So once that is, from there the creation starts, new creation starts, not from the inconscious, from the matrix of the psychic being. Then immediately you are removed from the basement, no? Where there is all this ignorance, suffering, falsehood, and negative things. So that's why what you said is very important, that this is a culmination of their journey to begin a new journey. But it is going to be the basic substrate from where the basic template from where evolution will start, and not from the inconscious.
Yeah. The other question, in some ways, it's kind of related, is that different people, because of the diversity in manifestation, have very different journeys and very different kind of mandates, so to say, from the divine to work in a particular lifetime. So don't you think education right from the elementary level should be incorporating all of these elements, and excessive uniformity in the garb of modern education is actually doing a lot of damage as far as the whole holistic development of a child, and for that matter even adults, is concerned? Because unless we are conscious of these movements, these possibilities in us, how would, and if it's not taught in education, how would it come through to us? So
This education, it has from the beginning, the education has to be totally reformulated. Today, modern education today that is happening all over the world, actually if you tell me, it is crumbling. You will see within a few years that the whole thing will crumble down, and the whole new thing has to be made. Whole thing is going to crumble down, except producing few marvelous scientists. Anyway, which is always need to be produced. All these things will always be produced, but somewhere down the line, something will has to change. Within a few years, you will see, was my hunch that I am feeling, that the whole thing has to change, and whole thing will change. This education is not at all fitting us. Something is grossly amiss. And children are receptive.
yeah, I
Children are
think so too. I
receptive
think
to
the
the cause.
receptivity is definitely in the young people is on the rise. Yeah.
Children are extremely receptive. When you work with your own children at home, then you see that receptivity. No, that structure of the being is modeled from Sri Aurobindo's works. The structure of the being that I presented has been modeled from, somebody asked it. It's not mine. It has been, I have made it, but I made it from Sri Aurobindo's description of consciousness.
Is it possible? Can I ask a very quick question? One more question, please.
Yes, yes. You have time.
Okay, so when you were talking about simultaneous truths, and you were saying that truth is actually non-linear and circular, while over the last 2,500 years, the emphasis, the importance has been kind of attributed to a linear way of thinking. Now, obviously, there is a shift, and we all kind of sense it. So when we talk about singular and plural, is that also the debate that has been going on between Dvaita and Advaita? Is it kind of for the same reason that truth is not kind of considered circular and simultaneous, but has to be binary?
Yes, yes. It's because truth has to be lived. You see those words that mother said, truth is not linear but global, not successive but simultaneous. Hence, it cannot be expressed in words, it has to be lived. And that is why all these different things are going on, because the correct synthesis. But Sri Aurobindo has actually synthesized all. It is not known, because you know that you have to first, that mind has to be prepared to understand Sri Aurobindo's synthetic thinking. All these things have been resolved by him, but only the mind doesn't know, because the mind has to be prepared for it.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm done for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I think. Somebody has a question? So anybody would have a last question or comment something? Then I think that Monica can sum up and James can wind up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Basu. And yeah, I don't have any words left after the talk. Actually, it's a very beautiful, elaborative, and so vast. I was just absorbed in the talk and also the questions and reflections. So thank you for the session today. And I'll just hand it over to James. James.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. I'm very much looking forward to exploring the dimensions of the inner mind. So looking forward to that, Dr. Basu. Very enlightening session. Thank you. Okay, everyone. So we meet again at 4 o'clock tomorrow, and have a good evening. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Basu.